Welcome to another edition of Five Questions with Vera Serban. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Pemberton, who's phoning in from the UK, and we're going to be talking about his work on the recent score for Aaron Sorkin's trial of the Chicago 7, his other creative output, his process, and some other fun stuff too. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, people on Instagram.
So I'm just going to get started with my first question, which was sort of how did the political themes of the Chicago 7 still being relevant to this day, like people being, put in similar situations for their ideologies, for defending what they believe. How did that whole thing affect you creating the soundscape of the movie? Were you trying to sort of embrace the sound of the that it took place in, or because the whole thing had more longevity, were you shooting for more contemporaries as well?
Well, the thing with the project is by the time we actually finished it, I'm assuming lots of people have seen the film here. If you haven't, go see the film. It's really great. It's on Netflix. I'll plug for the film. But it is really good. It's a really great film. And it's all set around these events of 68, 69, sort of anti-Vietnam War protests outside Democratic National Convention. But what was really interesting is when I was working on it, especially with the song, which we'll probably get onto in a bit, but by the time we'd actually finished everything, the world around us had kind of changed, and protest had gone from being this kind of this thing from the movie to suddenly being surrounded everywhere with the protest movement, especially in America with BLM and some other things, had really exploded. And that was really interesting because Aaron always wanted the film to really connect with a contemporary audience and not feel like a historical piece, especially the way it ends. He always wanted it to push towards the generation now in a way to sort of give them some kind of hope. And then, so in terms of stylistically, he weirdly didn't want me to lean into the 60s as a kind of jumping off point. I kind of used a lot of instrumentation that was common in the 60s, like kind of rock guitars and things like that, because it felt right for those scenes. But he never wanted anything to feel too pastiche-y, and there's things like the opening which feels somewhat more 60s because he wanted that to be a big juxtaposition against what you'd expect. And I originally wrote something for that opening which is more what you'd expect the opening to be, which is crazy psychedelic acid rock. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And he's like, nah, it's not what I want, because it's exactly what you'd expect. Which is cool, because he was right, because it is what you'd expect. Lots of shots of things blowing up in Vietnam, America going to shit. And he wanted the music to do the complete opposite to that. So he wanted to play this feel-good bubblegum kind of everything's great in America. Almost we used to call it chat show music, like the guy coming on stage to the chat show. So so stylistically, I'm sort of going all over the place with this answer, but
yeah.
Stylistically, he was I was leaning on elements from that era, but it wasn't like a driving force like it might be in certain other projects.
Because it does make sense for that intro to not fully sort of sonic landscape of that era, because narratively there's the idea that the government was sort of trying to suppress this sort of wave of opposition, these waves of ideas that were also the driving force behind the musical textures of the era. So to me, from the viewer standpoint, the juxtaposition does make sense too narratively, because it's the opposing force trying to keep everything, the status quo, the same, trying to keep people quiet. So it actually does make a lot of sense, juxtaposition.
Okay, good. Hooray. Yeah, I mean, the opening's kind of got two things. We have the very beginning, which is this thing with Celeste singing, which is the Hear My Voice theme, which opens over the the credits. And that's sort of I kind of call her the voice of hope through the film. And then we go into that crazy 7-minute intro, which was a absolute murder to finish, because you had to introduce so many characters. Aaron wanted it to start at 100 miles an hour and just keep on driving to 200 miles an hour and just build and build and build over 7 minutes, and you have to change all these other things in it. So that was probably the most complicated bit of scoring on the movie. We lot of passes on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is a good segue into my second question, which sort of is about your collaborative process, and I'm curious about what you think is the key to being a good collaborator, be it your like musical collaboration with Celeste or collaborating with Aaron Sorkin or any other directors that you might have worked with. Like, what do you think is the key element that renders it a healthy relationship?
I think being a film composer, it's a very weird job because you're basically a bit like being a servant. But at the same time, you've got to have something to offer. So I always go into these crap food metaphors whenever I talk about stuff. So get ready for another crap food metaphor. But it's a bit like you're a waiter or a chef and you're trying to get people to like you want them to try something exciting and new. They might want burger and chips, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, you don't want burger and chips. I can make you burger and chips if that's what you really, really want. But everyone's bored of burger and chips. So why don't we do something more exciting? And so musically, I'm always trying to work out what I think is best for the film. Every film is different. I try and score every film differently and not have a one process system that you just churn work through. And so I come up with, I'll talk to the director first and we'll kick ideas about. Sometimes there's tons of ideas, sometimes there's no ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit of a like, let's just experiment. Sometimes I'll have a very strong vision and the director won't, or the other way around. And I find that you want to like, at the end of the day, it's a director's film and they might have spent decades and, you know, like this film's been going for about 20 years, I think, in like pre-production and all this kind of thing. It's been stopped and started a million times. So you've really got to respect the director's vision. But what you really want is a director who respects your vision as well. And that's when you get, I think, the best kind of collaborative work, when you both respect each other and you think they're making the right decisions because they've got a different angle on the film. Like often the directors might be seeing things that you're not, or have visions that you're not, you've got to help achieve. But at the same time, I might be picking things out in movies that directors don't always know. There might be things I'm trying to do musically in like a music arc where I'm dropping themes all over the shop so they all pay off at this bit at the end. They might not know that yet. Even in this film, the song at the end, I kind of snuck under the back door to start off with because we were meant to have him, a Beatles, Here Comes the Sun. But I just didn't feel that was right. And over time, Aaron realized it wasn't. But I kind of thought about that early on. That I've got the game.
And what you said is sort of similar to what other composers have echoed throughout the course of these interviews that we've been having, is that even though the composer is, in a way, serving the director, you're both actually serving the story. So ultimately, what other people have said is that the most important thing is doing what's most good for the story and driving forward.
Yeah, I'm always like, there's two things I'm always thinking about, and it's the film and the audience. And I always think about how would I feel being in the audience and what would get me excited and what would connect me with the film. And I think the film is the most important thing. You've got to make the film work. But I think the audience is an interesting thing that I always think about, because you can make a film work and it can just work and it can just be like, oh, hey, that works. There's a sad bit. There's some sad music. But when I'm in the audience and I'm watching a film, I know those moments that really make me like pull you in. And I'm always trying to make those happen. And I'm always kind of thinking kind of like selfishly of myself watching the movie and what fired me up. And I think I know when I see a movie or a TV show or anything, and there's something really cool or different in there, I instantly connect in a new way, because I think a lot of film music is often like, here's shorthand to say, this is exciting, this is heroic, this is sad, scary. And the trouble is, once you go into shorthand of like, you know, telling people, you're giving them something they already expect. So they know that when they hear the music that goes, let's see if I've got like some silly over the top noises on here. But like, you know, if you get a kind of like, let's see if we've got like, it's a big rise into something. It's exciting, but you've heard it a million times.
Yeah, it's very manipulative.
Yeah, it's very manipulative, and it works, and you can do something that's maybe way more effective than trying to do something different. But it's, as an audience member, it's generally a bit boring.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to do things that sometimes work and sometimes don't, but it's like trying to find out how do you give people something new? Because I think as soon as you have something new, you actually pay attention to what's on screen better, because or what's being said, because your brain's not going, oh, here's the thing that says this is a big exciting climax, or this is a sad moment. And what you really want is that thing, almost like when you hear music for the first time, you go, what is this? How is this making me feel? And I want to try and do things where you don't always necessarily know straight away what you want to feel.
Exactly. Yeah.
That pushes you into the picture. I mean, that's not exactly true, because I do want to make you feel happy and sad and blah, blah, blah. But I'm trying to give you like a surprise, like in a Tarantino movie, right? Like if you go see a Tarantino movie, what makes them exciting is you never know who's going to die.
Exactly.
And so if you go see a superhero movie, you know exactly who's not going to die. It's the 5 people on the poster.
Yeah.
And that's why they're generally, for me, a bit like unexciting, because there's never any surprise. I know there's going to be 2 big robots hitting each other, like in the last act. And I like things that surprise you.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, your example of Tarantino too is that what he's so great at is sort of recontextualizing some sound too, which is that, you've touched upon how the most expected and the easiest score is not always the most original option. And what he does really well with this sound, his films, is that you think you're hearing something that's going to take you somewhere, but it actually doesn't. So it does, even though that seems like, oh, this is the kind of song that would put you in a romantic mood, he'll put it right over like death scene. So I think context really matters too.
Yeah. I mean, context is often also you need a good director to I always think a great film score really is half of that is a large part of that will be down to the director actually allowing the composer or understanding music to give it that moment. Like in Chicago 7, for instance, I'd met Aaron really early on, and he'd already worked out that he wanted these 4 big moments in the film, which is weirdly quite rare for a director to understand, giving music these really important bits where, I love films where there's not a lot of music, because it's loads of films have way too much music. It just means you just get fed up of it. Music has no impact. It's just a load of noise that goes on continuously. Whereas if you hold it back for key moments, it is really powerful. And he understood that, which is for a composing point of view really cool, because it's okay, he actually understands the power of music. So it means in this film, the opening, the 2 riots, and the ending, they're really big, bold bits of music where it's a huge character, and the rest of it is incredibly, the idea is that score is very subtle and you don't really notice it, so the big bits really cut through. I rewatched Aliens last week. I haven't seen that for years, and it stands up so well, just on every level. And one of the things that's really interesting about that movie is it's very minimally scored. There's a few bits of Needle Drop from 2001, and then there's all the James Horner stuff, but it's not wall to wall. And when it comes in, it really connects. That there's a big fight between Ripley and the alien at the end, and it's all just sound, and it's really tense. It's really exciting. Now I kind of get the feeling that if that movie was made now, so much of it would just have music everywhere, and then it ends up losing its power.
Yeah, that restraint is very seldom seen in big budget films these days. Before we move on to my third question, I also do want to touch upon your creative collaboration with Celeste, who sort of quite literally embodies the voice of the movie. I just want to learn a bit more about how that collaboration, how it evolved.
Well, it was weird, because I started writing the song I started like trying to come up with this idea for a song for the end, because I kind of felt that we needed a song, and I like it was always meant to end on a song. It was meant to end on the Beatles, "Here Comes the Sun," but lots of us just didn't feel that was right. And also the other thing that's interesting about that is it's like everyone has their own connection with "Here Comes the Sun." Like I spent half of last year recording different cover versions of it for the Danny Boyle Yesterday movie, which I was MDing on. So I was kind of like quite sick of "Here Comes the Sun," to be honest. Even though it's a great track, I just heard it so many times. And everyone has got their own connection to that song. It's such a great song, and it's such a powerful song that suddenly you put those kind of things on these other events, and it's hard to always connect them with that event because you've got so many memories of it yourself. So I always thought it would be better to create something new, so you're creating a new memory and a new experience for everyone, which is always, I think, the best thing in movies, when you create new experiences in people's heads. So I started plonking around and kind of came up with the initial idea of the tune and the lyric. And again, the lyric was really hard just to come up with, trying to, like, how do you take like the entire film and like what is the concept you can turn into a song. With this movie, I was thinking, like, what is this movie actually about? Like, and I was like, there's so many different levels in this movie, but I think deep down the movie is about democracy, and it's about justice, and about protest. And it's, you know, so I was like, well, why do people protest? And they protest because no one's listening. Like, no one's listening to them, and the only way they can have their voice listened to is protest, which is like last resort almost. It's like no one's listening to you, so you protest. And you protest because you want people to hear your voice and hear your, like, your dream and your kind of how you want to change things. And then just starting those three lines, like, hear my voice, I was like, that was like ping, that's like, oh, that's lucky. Like, I kind of got lucky, basically. It was a really cool idea. So then I started working on that into a melody and a like half, you know, kind of got like into a bit like half finished song, but I needed to, like, A, finish it, and B, find someone to work with and on that and sing it. And I'd really love Celeste's work. I don't know how well she's done in the States, but over here she's like quite a new artist, and loads of fantastic records. Got an amazing voice that felt very timeless, and also great for like a kind of more melodic film composer style way. So I tracked her down, and then we started, and she was up for it, which was amazing. And then we started texting, and we finished the song that way. So we'd sort of, you know, I sent her, here's my first bits, and then we kind of expanded it. She added some bits to lyrics, did something in the middle, and we kind of made the whole song kind of happen over lockdown, which was super bizarre because we were doing it over WhatsApps, FaceTimes. She recorded her first vocals in the bathroom on WhatsApp, and they sounded terrible. Like, and I was like, I can't use this and play this to Aaron. So we had to, like, try and get her some recording gear, and then I had to give her Logic lessons over FaceTime. But eventually we got this song finished in this crazy remote way of never actually meeting face to face. And then finally we got into the studio to kind of do it all properly. And it was really cool. Just, she was great to work with. You know, she's really awesome. She's got an amazing voice. And I think together we've kind of made this song that actually, the weirdest thing is we wrote it for 68, 69, but then by the time it was finished, the kind of world around us changed, and all the ideals behind it suddenly seemed super relevant today. And that was just like a weird, nice synchronicity. I think when you try and write something that is truthful and genuine, it hopefully will always connect, like, you know, over time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing with all these issues and all these struggles still being relevant, is that any kind of storytelling or art that you want to do around it, if you do it right, it is going to be time. It is going to be relevant as long as these you know, these efforts for democracy continue, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's not just like, I always think the idea behind the song is not just about that. It's like, it's to do with everything. It's to do with like art commerce, anything. It's like, you know, I'm trying to like, the way I write music, I'm trying to like project my voice into the world. How I buy my food, you know, where I buy my food from is a way of projecting my voice of like how I want the world to be. Do I want to go to like big mean supermarkets if I can avoid it? No, I want to try and avoid them. And so it's like a whole, it's a lot deeper. Even the song, actually, when you look at it, like, obviously this is a nice side effect, not what I intended, but you look deep into it, it's actually, it's about everyone making anything, like anyone writing, that's, you know, like directing, creating, they're all trying to get their voice heard, really. And it doesn't have to be as literal as a voice. It can just be how you interact with the world.
Exactly. Um, because you've sort of touched upon the sort of unorthodox way the song came together, I want to pivot to my third question, which is sort of what sort of impact do you think the scale of a project has on your creative process? Because I know you've had a very prolific output over the last couple of years in projects ranging from different genres to different scales, from you know, longer form storytelling like Dark Crystal to like, you know, bigger budget or like mid budget movies, and how you know the scale of a project affects how you approach it.
I mean, I love doing all kinds of stuff, so I don't want to be like the guy who just does big budget things or just does indie projects. I'm really fascinated in like every aspect of like cinema and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you've got to be aware of what the expectation is on a project. Sometimes not having like, I'm probably about to start a project quite soon that's got like so little money, like a super low budget UK film.
Mm-hmm.
But I really love it. It's really like different and unusual. And the fact it's got such a small budget is exciting for me because it means there's a whole bunch of things I can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to work out a way to score it and score it well with no resources. And I like things where you're forced into working differently. Like every project I do, I try and work differently so it doesn't become stale.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, every film is, you're trying to like work out, how do you make this story work? How do you make this feel exciting? How do you make it feel like a world, like a, you know, like I did this documentary this year as well called last year, called Rising Phoenix, and that was a pretty low budget job, but I wanted it to feel, I didn't want it to feel low budget. And again, that was during lockdown, and I had to do everything here and then just recording with some disabled musicians because the film's about Paralympics,
Mm-hmm.
remotely. And it was trying to work out how you just make all these things work. And I like always not knowing what I'm doing and being on my toes.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get easy. And I still don't really know what I'm doing. I've somehow blagged it for the last 10 years and somehow kept a career going. So,
And just because you've touched upon, is there a specific genre of film that sort of inspires you most, or is it more so about the creatives behind the project or the story?
I love doing stuff that's different to the thing I did before. So I like, you know, I just like always being challenged a bit, and just like, it's sometimes really annoying because I always agree to do films that are not very apparent what the music score should be,
Mm-hmm.
rather than ones where you know exactly what it is as soon as you see the poster. And that's cool because it's really challenging, but it's tough because it means you spend a long time working out what the hell you're going to do.
Yeah.
But I like that. I try and, if I can, choose films and filmmakers who I feel want something different or interesting.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to keep you for much longer, but I have one last question, something that I ask to all of our guests because I know that there's a lot of aspiring young musicians and film composers that tune in. So I want to know, this could be good or bad. Is there a moment or a day that you consider to be a turning point in your career, and what sort of lessons did you learn from it? It could be a project too. You don't have to name it, but
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of different moments. In terms of film, there's like, in terms of cinema, there's like a few. Like the first film I did was called The Awakening by this director, great British director called Nick Murphy.
mm-hmm.
And I kind of threw everything I had at that, in terms of like basically spending all the money I had. Sorry to be so vulgar talking about money, but it's like it's a big thing of a composer working out how you make something happen on a budget. And I was just like, I just want to make a really good film score, and like I will kind of take a hit on this because I've just done a cooking show, and that will pay for my, I'm juggling other jobs and waiting for this one work. And I'm really pleased I did that, and like really pushed it as far as I could, because then the film came out. I'm really proud of that score, but not a lot of people saw the film or heard it. But one person did, and that person was Ridley Scott. And then Ridley Scott really liked the score, and he invited me in to meet him. I had a great chat with him. I thought that was it. And then I get a call a week later, which is another big moment, saying Ridley wants you to do his new movie. And I think that was a very big moment for me as well. I kind of like slightly went, oh, fuck, shit. But it turned out, it was a really great experience working with him. And then, having his kind of seal of approval changes how other people think about you in the industry. I mean, I'm not saying everybody in the industry is quite fickle and will base how good they think you are based on other people's opinions and the box office returns of movies. But I'm not saying that, and not saying that, if you hear what I say.
Because I think it's like, I mean, you could, if you looked at it on a very surface level, you could say, oh, you getting a call from Ridley Scott, like write it, like jolt it down under, oh, you got lucky stuff and whatever. But something that almost all of the guests that I've had on the show echoed is that it's all about, having your work sort of stand for itself. And when that moment of luck strikes, be prepared to, scale up, have your shit together, just sort of be ready to sort of step up to the challenge. And the only way you can do that is to, regardless of the scale of the movie or how big the project is, sort of doing the best job you can so that the work speaks for itself, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, because I think there's a couple of things. One is like, I know a bunch of composers who, like quite young ones, like, hey, when do I get to score big Hollywood movies or this? And I'm like, well, there's no rush. Like, the longer you spend slightly in what you might perceive the wilderness, the better. You get to learn tons of mistakes. Make your mistakes when no one can see them. Like, that is so vital. Like, because and just you learn all these things that you can't necessarily learn, that aren't just like scoring to picture or creating sounds. It's all to do with politics and nonsense, which is a terribly boring and huge part of being a film composer, sadly. But what I liken it to is filling up a beer glass. And every time you're working on something that's maybe not a film, but you're filling your beer glass with knowledge and skills, and you've got to make sure you keep filling that beer glass, because if you suddenly get a big movie and you've only done this much beer glass filling, that once you're in movie world and the big movie is super visible, so you only have that much beer to drink on. You're not be able to refill it again. It's very hard to. So you kind of want to get your beer glass super full. But then the other thing I'd say is the work is the most important thing. Like, fuck everything else. Fuck social media. No one, fuck your website. No one cares. If you do good work, you cut through. That is the most important thing. If you do something different, something that feels strong, something that feels original, you will cut through so much faster than someone who's got, every single sample library and has a massive studio and does fancy videos of themselves playing the keyboards. Like, that's, that might help you with certain people, but it's always really going to be about the work. Like, the loudest voice you should have as an artist is your work. You shouldn't, like, the thing that's quite good about being a film composer is no one knows who you are. So your work always wants to be louder than you. And that's, in fact, that's probably the best thing to take away, is always make sure your work is louder than you are. And your work is better and more sought after than actually you telling everyone else it is.
Exactly. And now that, obviously the internet has democratized the creative process so much for everyone. There's so many opportunities. It's not like, you know, how it was back in the 60s or 70s when, like, you know, the road to becoming a film composer was like, you know, carrying the sheets for like another composer for like 10 years and like hoping you get your break. Now there's like, you know, short form content, long form content, video games. There's so many avenues for you to actually build up your work and your portfolio, and hope that, you know, someone out there is gonna break through all of this saturation and like champion work and give you the break that you need, which was like something like I had Michael Abels on earlier in the summer, and his first like film composing job was for Jordan Peele's Get Out, and he did that when he was in his mid 50s, and he'd never scored a film before, and it was all about him like having a prolific output for 20-25 years, and Jordan Peele going, this is the person that I want to build the sound for my movie.
Yeah, I mean, like when I met Ridley, he was quizzing me about my time in TV, and I'd done about 20 years working in British TV at that point on a million different things. And he had this really cool line. He's like, I learned how to direct, this is Ridley, like making commercials.
Mm-hmm.
I did my 10,000 hours in the garage doing that, and that's how I became a director. And he was like, you've done your 10,000 hours in TV, and you've learned how to be a composer. And I was like, oh, that's a cool line I can use for the only time I ever meet Ridley Scott. But obviously we then work together.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing to think about is you don't like all this like, I'll do the big movie. It doesn't matter. It's like you should just be like, if you're making music and like if you're just making music and enjoying it, that's fucking ace. That's like one of the greatest things in the world. If you're getting paid for it, it's like double good, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it's don't think I'm only doing this to get to this point here. I think this is the other big mistake is that, I want to be doing like Marvel robot hit movie Bang Bang 3 or whatever, right? It's like, enjoy what you're doing. Like when I was doing TV work, I really loved doing that. And I think one of the reasons I ended up doing quite well was because I loved everything I did. I didn't care if it was like a tiny documentary, I did some really dodgy reality shows. I did the original series Love Island in Britain,
Mm-hmm.
and Celebrity Island, which were not necessarily my finest moments on IMDb. But, and it's not really my cup of tea as a show, but I wanted to make them still sound cool. I wanted to put everything I could into them. I went and recorded some strings in Prague.
Mm-hmm.
I did anything I could to make anything sound as good as it could be. And I really enjoyed it. And I think it's actually just about, I don't know, we live in a culture where it's always like chasing the next big thing and trying to be the biggest and the best, but really it should be about just enjoying what you're doing right now.
Exactly.
It's, you're working on a massive, massive movie. It's a pain in the ass. It's a nightmare. It's like any big movie. You've got a million people beating you up the whole time, making you change things every like 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you're working on something smaller, maybe you get more freedom, but it's always just enjoy what you're doing. If you're doing any kind of music, it's like one of the, like making anything, I think creating is like the most important purpose of mankind. I'm gonna get a bit deep here, but basically I think mankind is put on earth to create, because creating is making something new. Okay, and you're making something that doesn't necessarily exist before. Now, it might have sort of existed because it sounded like something else you've heard a million times before, but you've made something new. And I think the more you can focus on that and making something new and making something great, then that's what all composers should be aiming for. And it's really easy to say, oh yeah, go and just be an original voice. It's fucking hard to have an original voice and
Totally
look through that system, but you should enjoy just making things, because making things base.
Yeah, I think that's a really great note to end this conversation on, because I don't want to take more of your precious time. But thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. The Trial of the Chicago 7 is streaming globally now on Netflix. It's a beautiful, very relevant, very crafted movie whose themes still resonate very heavily to this day. I'd like to extend my congratulations to you on all the accolades and nominations that you've been getting, and best of luck with it in this very sports season.
Yeah, what a load of sucky though, right? It's like the one time I get like all this kind of awards action. It's like the one time I'm going to watch the whole bloody thing in my pajamas at home on a laptop.
That's just the world that we live in right now. Thank you again for joining me.
That's right. Have fun. Thank you, everyone else, for hearing me witter on. I can't believe you're still watching it, but thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.